Hello and welcome to the Corporate Facility Council. Technically, it's not the first Wednesday this month, but generally our first Wednesday series webinar. It's the first of 2018. I thank you for bringing in the new year with us. I'm Joshua Amos, Component Liaison for the Corporate Facility Council. I do want to let everyone know they have been muted for audio quality. If you do have any questions at any time during the webinar, please feel free and type them into the question box, and we'll go over them during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. And our presentation today is You Are Not in This Alone, How to Best Optimize Your Contracted Services, presented by Tina Schaus. And I do want to let everyone know that if you do want a PDF copy of this PowerPoint, you can download it now in your control panel. Simply go to the handout section, expand that out, and you can download that. And also a copy of the recording and the PDF will be on the Corporate Facility Council website under their webinar archive. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Tina Schaus. Tina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it. First of all, I also want to send my appreciation to Wayne Wetzel, who was nice enough to ask me to join you all today. Wayne and I have been IFMA buddies for several years now, and I've really enjoyed working together. So he asked me if I'd like to have the opportunity to come to you and give a presentation, and I said, sure, I'll break my sabbatical just for him. But anyway, it is nice to be with you all today. I used to be a member of the Corporate Facilities Headquarters Council, and when I was the facility director for Sprint back in, from 88 to 95 or somewhere in there. And anyway, spent 18 years there, and after that, I became Vice President of Client Services for FEA for 8 years. I have a total of 29 years of experience. One of my greatest joys in the facility management world is the fact that I had the pleasure of serving as the chairman of the board for the IFMA Board of Directors in 2005 and 2007. And then really had a wonderful experience as the chair of the Global FM Board of Directors chairman. And that was a lot of fun. It gave me an opportunity to see a lot of different facilities around the world and meet some awesome people. I do also teach and create facility management courses for IFMA and do some speaking still here and there in my semi-retirement. In that semi-retirement, I started an entity called the FM Transitions, which is basically a double entendre for the fact that I help corporations and individuals transition their operations, as well as I'm transitioning from working very, very hard for the last few years to semi-retirement. But it is my pleasure to be with you all today. When we talk about the councils, I want you all, sometimes some people will join several different councils or communities, and because it suits their expertise or areas that they think they might want to know a little bit more about. And so I always put this slide in my presentation, not only to give a shout out for the Corporate Facilities Council, but also my council, which I'm the president of, the FM Consultants Council. But there's lots of other organizations out there within IFMA that can be that peer support. So if you're venturing into responsibilities that maybe you are new to you and you need that expertise or need to have some exposure, or more than that, actually to make connections, because that's what it's all about, is helping and helping you learn even more. So today, we've allocated an hour, but I'm trying to keep my webinars down to about 30, 35 minutes these days, because people are busy and not always able to dedicate a full hour, but we'll see how it goes. And then I will have a chance at the end for some Q&A. And also, I'd like to give some people an opportunity to talk a little bit about some successful contract relationships that they may have had if you feel so moved. So we're going to talk about how to create effective RFPs, including that really incorporate realistic objectives. But I wanted, before I get into the objectives of this presentation, I want to tell you a little bit about how it came about. Back in 2016, I read an article about a Nobel Peace Prize that was given to two professors, one from MIT and one from Harvard. And it was about the studies. The two gentlemen that won it were Professor Hart and Professor Holmstrom. And what they did is they did a very in-depth study as to how contracts really affect our society and the subsequent behavior. And I don't think we really stop and think about that as much as maybe we should. That sometimes we think of a contract as just this, legalese, 55-page document that nobody ever reads or has any real concept. And it really came to mind when I started doing contract abstracts and including those for my clients to be able to get to the meat of what are the bits and pieces of the contract that they really needed to be cognizant of every single day, and how that drove the relationship and drove the behavior. And sometimes I saw a real shift in change when it came to their behavior once they understood exactly what were the particular aspects of that contract. It also, it talks about creating effective RFPs, which incorporate really realistic objectives. And not only when I was a facility manager did I understand the effectiveness of a good contract, but it had to be realistic. It had to have truly, the big six of what were the 6 things that we really wanted this contract or this agreement to achieve. And very seldom do I run into people that actually take the time to really think about that. They think of it as more of just engaging a contractor or a contracted service or an outsourced provider or an HVAC mechanical company or a consultant like myself. And they don't really think about what do I want out of this? And then it becomes very mechanical and very dry. And so I did a little more digging. And that led me, my colleagues and I, to delve even deeper into what does it mean what does it mean to really take an effective contract and build it into a true partnership? Because that's what it really should be. It should not be one group taking advantage of the other, one giving too much or not enough. It truly needs to be a true partnership. Because what we found is that bottom line, contracts exist to basically shape working relationships. So today, I'm just going to share with you some of the mechanics of what is in an effective contract, what it can accomplish, when do you need the assistance of the contracted partner, and how to design that relationship, including how to sell that to your boss. This is the only disadvantage of doing a webinar versus an in-house or in-person presentation, because at this moment I would ask the crowd to say, how many of you know that you need help, but for one reason or the other, it's hard to sell the idea. Sometimes people are afraid to go out and get contracted services because they don't want to look to their boss like they don't know, they're not competent enough to do their job, or they feel a little inept. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Developing that performance criteria and a contract governance plan. And what I mean by that is not only are we going to create this contract, but we're going to figure out how we're going to live together, how we're going to work together. How are we going to judge whether or not the contracted services of a outsourced provider or a service provider or a consultant or whatever, how are you going to tell whether or not they're really living up to their end of the bargain? What are going to be the SLAs, if you will, the service level agreements between you? And then how will you measure that? And particularly using KPIs, key performance indicators, so that you can monitor and measure the performance and not just have it be a gut feeling. The other thing I want to talk a little bit about is understanding the pros and cons of performance and prescriptive-based contracts. In the past, most every contract I worked with were very, very prescriptive, and I'm going to go into what that means in detail here in a moment. But what we're seeing in the industry, and actually I first noticed it with government contracts becoming a lot less prescriptive and more of a performance-based contract. And so we'll get into that in later slides. Also, we need to look at the trigger points that require you to supplement your internal FM team. What does that really look like? What are the trigger points that where you say, yes, I do need to bring in additional bandwidth or headcount or expertise in a certain area? And then how do you sell that need? Like I said, for a consultant or outsourced resources. But it all starts with what are the issues facing the facility manager? And this is probably one of the most trying times and challenging times for folks because there's so much going on. There's so much changing. At least we're getting away from, at least in the people that I'm working with, it's managing costs, but it's not, a lot of people are getting a little bit of relief, and it's not do more with less, do more with less, do more with less, as we were cheering, especially back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And now it's really more about value-added FM, which I think is awesome. It's people are getting more in tune with looking at the value that you bring to the organization. I have another presentation that I do called "You Are Valuable, Believe It and Share It." And within that, we talk a lot about what are the real contributions that a facility manager makes to the organization. How do they affect the productivity of the individuals working there? How do they maintain their facility so that they can maximize the total cost of ownership, or they can improve the life expectancy of the assets? And that leads you to the whole asset reliability and reliability-centered maintenance. So it's not just cutting everything to the bone and only fixing something when it's broken, but it's really starting to look at improving and increasing the life expectancy and looking at something in the longer span. So it's the true total cost of ownership and not nickel and diming you, every quarter. Technology advancement. It's interesting because I have a lot of people who, within an interview or at a presentation or teaching a class, and they'll say, "Okay, what's the newest and best and greatest change that you've seen in facility management?" And I say, it's so much of the same thing except for technology. Buildings are still buildings, facades are still facades, mechanical systems are mechanical systems, but the real change and where we've been given a huge enabler is technology. And more people are seeing the advantages of a CMMS system or an IWMS system or TAFM, and they're understanding what they can actually do for them. And I would highly encourage you, when you do start looking for an IWMS system or a CMMS system, to really think about what is it you want that technology to do for you. What data is important to you? Where can you really maximize the use of that technology? Because it's not just about measuring data. You really, just to know how many work orders you had in one quarter or 1 month or whatever, that really is quite useless information unless you know what was the genesis of those work orders. Were they rework? Were they were they among your top 10 trouble calls? Are they repeated over and over again? So you have to move that use of that technology, not just the data gathering, but data analytics, so that it can really tell you what's going on in your business and how you can make fundamental changes. Aging workforce, we've all heard a lot about that. The baby boomers are retiring, or like me, trying to retire. That continues to be a challenge. But for those of you just getting into the industry, or you're kind of at the midpoint of your life, you're coming in at an incredibly important time, because the job openings are the best I've ever seen them. The salaries are the best I've ever seen them. They're truly equipping their individuals with the right kind of education. IFMA is making great strides, as always, being an educator for the conferences and with their educational offerings, as well as other organizations do. Security continues to be a risk. You have to look at the risk analysis and do everything. When I look at security, I look at it from business continuity and risk assessment of business resilience. How resilient is your business and the organization that you support, and what role do you play? Limited FM expertise. Sometimes people are literally thrown into this industry, and that's where you're going to need the assistance of either peers or councils or education or outside influences, like I talked about. Climate change preparedness. Here again, there's a lot of debate, and I'm not going to go there, about climate change and so on and so forth. And I actually call it global weirdness. It's not so much global warming; it's just you have to be aware of the changes that are going on around you and how that's going to impact everything from your utilities to the life expectancy of your assets. And speaking of assets, so many of my clients and my friends and fellow facility managers are dealing with aging facilities and infrastructure, and they haven't been able to replace some of the buildings that they thought they were going to. So just really looking at that. But let me tell you, I have a lot of friends that belong to BIFM, which is British Institute of Facility Management, and they're managing buildings that are hundreds of years old. So we've kind of got it good over here if your building's only 50. So when I say you're not alone, I've already alluded to some of the places where you can find assistance, and this can be short-term engagements, it can be long-term contracts, it can be a seasonal agreement, whatever. You look to your peers. That is one of the best benefits of IFMA, is the fact that your peers truly can be incredibly valuable. I'd like to put in a plug right now for Engage. And for those of you who have not gotten into it, please explore IFMA's Engage community portal. It is fantastic. It has caught on very, very well. You can go in there, you can pose a question that you have where you need some advice. I've seen questions everywhere from how to handle mice infestations all the way to picking the right IDMS, to business resiliency, to education for facility managers. So Engage, check it out. Service providers, here again, everybody who's listening to this or will listen to this as a recorded message has probably had one or, has had a service provider of one sort or the other. Maybe it's a complete total facility management outsource provider. Perhaps it's just a one service provider. Consultants can also be, and I speak from on the side of being a facility manager and hiring consultants and how valuable that was, but also I have the pleasure of working with a lot of really, really bright consultants who have had, hundreds and hundreds of years collectively of experience that they can share. Associations, here again, IFMA is my number one, but there's so many others that are out there that can be of assistance for a myriad of connections. And then communities and councils, as we already talked about. So what are the trigger points? Now you can see my selfie there when I was about 8. What are the trigger points? What are the pain points that tell you that you really need outside resources? But you need to take those resources and make sure that you're building the right team. Is it the fact that you have grown so far, so fast, and you just can't get the staff allocated quick enough? There might have been, something significantly changed that you need expertise in a field. Maybe you have not had data centers before, and all of a sudden now you're assigned and you're responsible for data centers, and you don't feel that you have the expertise for that. It can be a myriad of things. You just have to decide what are the things that I am either in a short-term need or a long-term need, and I need to find the right partner, the right team, and building the right team. Looking at expert advice and expertise that's outside of your comfort zone. And believe me, there's nothing wrong with asking for help. There was a saying some time ago about fake it till you make it, and I don't know. I would be scared to live to that. I think you really need to look at what is the expertise out there, and then when you start identifying that, this is where your peers really come into place, and this is where you can get references, where you can talk it through and say, how did this work for you? How did you decide what type of a contract to agree to, whether it's performance or prescriptive, etc. But seek out that advice and expertise. And it's really great. Most of the consultants that I know, even before they go into an engagement or a service provider, they're so free sometimes with some really, really good advice. And sometimes if you can just get some friendly advice, it may turn into an agreement. It may be just that little tidbit that you needed, and you don't need a full service contract. So how to build a strong business case. Be very specific about what you want this partner to do. What is the time frame that you're going to be needing it? what exactly are the services that you want them to use or to provide. And here again, sometimes it can be a true ROI. I have a client that I'm working with in Kansas City right now, and one of the things that they did was they were trying to figure out whether it was less expensive to continue to do their electrical and their mechanical work in-house or go ahead and subcontract it. I've seen the ROI studies on landscaping. There's a great deal of different types of services that you need to do that ROI study on to see how it can actually build a business case to take to your boss. And sometimes it's just a learning experience. So ensuring a good fit. This is where you need to not only do your homework up front to get some references, but you need to get to know the people. And that's the beauty of being involved in a council or a community, or just in working with your peers. And then sitting down and really visiting with the individuals that are going to be responsible for your account, getting to know them. Most of us buy from people we like. We want to spend time with people that we really enjoy. And the nice thing is that sometimes you can make that choice based on your gut feel. You can base it on references. You can base it on past projects. But you've got to feel comfortable and not go into it going, oh, there's just something that bugs me. I don't know what it is, but there's just something that bugs me about this individual, or there was an error about them. And so you really have to make sure that you feel that this is going to be a good fit for you. So trust your intuition. All right, so let's talk about I alluded to the performance and prescriptive before. So you need to make sure you are selecting the right type of contract. That is really critical from the very beginning. So how do you really decide whether it's going to be performance or prescriptive? Well, let's identify what the differences are first. So in a prescriptive-based contract that you're going to negotiate, it outlines exact specifications that you expect. It's way less flexible. However, you dictate and know exactly what to expect. However, on the Delta side, it could stifle the innovation and morale, because you're really restricting the contractor that you are looking at or you're thinking about partnering with, but you're boxing them in, if you will, and they really feel like they don't really have an opportunity to be innovative or to be creative. And there again, contractors might have less incentive or motivation to do anything beyond, this is the box, this is the prescription that they asked me to do, and so I'm going to do it. And quite honestly, it's a little bit more boring, if you ask me, because it's just very, very literal, very boxed in. But sometimes there's things that have to be prescriptive. For instance, you can get into a situation where security requirements or anything that has to do with code or regulations, codes and regulations. Those, however, do need to be very specific, because you're dealing with something that has either legal ramifications, security ramifications, or safety. And we all know that that's something that's first and foremost in an FMer's life. Performance, here again, describes more of the expected outcome. So not how, I don't want you to clean the bathrooms every day at 2 o'clock or mow the yard at 3 o'clock every Friday. But I do, however, I want there to always be, the grass can never be more than, 3.5 inches high. It always needs to be green, et cetera, et cetera. It does provide a lot more flexibility for the service provider. And here again, allowing them to be more innovative. And also, you can look at possible cost efficiencies and improvements. And so if they can come up with a better way of doing it versus what you think is right, give them the respect of being an innovator, of being a respected company that's their job, is to come up with innovations. Sometimes you don't have time to just sit around and, think, oh my goodness, how can I be more strategic? How can I be more creative? You're kind of in the middle of, keeping the fires out and making sure that the facilities are running and you're governing the contracts appropriately. But then coming together with your partner and really looking at those innovations together, it can not only end up saving you money, and realizing some cost efficiencies or improvements in the actual operation, but it's actually improved and kind of makes the day a little more interesting and a little more fun. And it allows you more time to concentrate on the more strategic matters. And that is one thing that I hear facility managers say over and over. I don't have time to be creative. I don't have time to be as strategic as I want to. But if you were empowering and giving your contractor more leeway, you might be able to find that time. So here again, this is the detail that I just spoke of. Mowing and edging grass every week. I live in a maintenance-free villa, and every day, every Friday at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, I can tell you that they will be out there mowing. It doesn't matter whether the grass has grown. It doesn't matter whether it's almost dead. It doesn't matter if it's 6 inches high, because they've apparently been told that in their contract. Something I'm going to work with them on. And here again, when to aerate. Well, maybe there's some new fertilizer or new methods that make it different than when you did it yourself. So all of these different things, you want to kind of think, is it really worth me being that detail oriented or pay that much attention? And let them be creative. As long as it maintains the grass within your parameters, as long as you have repairs or replace damaged plants or shrubs or something like that, and everything's neatly trimmed, do you really care what day of the week that they do it? That's the decision you have to make. So why performance-based contracting? Well, I think I've given you a couple of reasons, but outsourcing allows the organization to concentrate on their core business. And performance, it also should allow the contractor to bring their extensive experience. And here again, this is where you need to decide how much, where does the line of demarcation come? And I think the other thing that I would warn you or kind of caution you about is be real careful that you are not multi-managing, because I've also seen this where I'll see an FM organization go ahead and outsource something, but then they've left some of their FM expertise still in control, and from that there's conflict, because there's actually there's too many cooks in the kitchen type thing. So really think about how much expertise, how much coverage you need, and then what you really want to still maintain control of. Here again, but then there are times and there are places, like I said, might be more appropriate in a healthcare environment or something that's really highly regulated. It's more about the how to approach. And the other thing that you have to think about in a prescriptive-based contract, the owner is responsible, much, much more so. And do you really want to own all of that responsibility? That's another big question. So let's talk a little bit about creating effective RFPs. And I'm just going to skim through these fairly quickly. I've already kind of covered on some of them. Achievable objectives and expected outcomes. Here again, don't set this bar so high that there's no way, based on the budget, that you can actually meet those objectives. And I actually use APA, A-P-P-A. It's an organization, professional organization, that has done a really wonderful job of creating levels of achieving expected outcomes. And their rates 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they're very clear about what is clean, what is mechanically correct, what is the PM to DM ratio, etc. And so that might be one place that you could maybe look for. If you have a budget where you can achieve a level 2, then make those objectives appropriate to that level and to that budget, because you cannot ask yourself or your own team or an outsourced provider to provide level 1 when you only have enough budget for level 2 or level 3. So that helps you clearly define the scope. And that also forms the type of contract, whether it's going to be a prescriptive or performance. And then the terms that would govern that. Here again, then you get into the governing law, the regulation, the guidelines. And this is usually where a facility manager has to go to their legal department. They use their finance department, their human resources and such to help them really create a very solid RFP and follow-on contract that's fair for all parties. Also, if you have any special circumstances or conditions, and that might be operating hours, are not the norm. It might be we don't honor, or we don't acknowledge the national holidays. There might be some safety conditions or security conditions that they need to be aware of. Then we start looking at what are the relevant experience, and like the references I spoke to, the proposal requirements. And one of the things that I highly recommend is when you're in the first stages of creating that RFP, go ahead and send them a copy of your template, your contractual agreement template, because if they already see some things in there that they can't live with, then there's a good chance that they're not going to be a good partner, or they just cannot meet those requirements. So it doesn't waste their time, and it doesn't waste your time. And then you need to decide whether you put a separate bid sheet in or it's included in the full package. Do you go ahead and evaluate the proposal without being biased as to the pricing? Because here again, if you remember from the very beginning, we talked about value-added FM. And I'm hearing more and more that service providers, property management companies, anybody is really trying to get away from lowest bid and get to, this is the value. We are a value-added organization or a value-added company, person, consultant, whatever. And so sometimes it's not a bad idea to go ahead and review that without looking or having the bias of understanding the bid pricing. So here again, partner. And this is, really identifying the partnering expectations. What do you expect from me? What do I expect from you? Trust, respect, cooperation. Really looking at how to accommodate the flexibility that is needed sometimes in a contract without getting taken advantage of, or, it can work both ways. I've seen clients take advantage of their contractors. I've seen contractors take advantage of their clients. And this is where you have to work very, very closely to understand how to accommodate this. And then performance incentives. Be careful and see if that really does fit, because sometimes people really, that motivates them, but make sure that it is fair and equitable. And there's also because that's where you get the opportunities for innovation. And I also am seeing that a lot in the RFPs is, what is your approach to innovation opportunities? All right, contract governance. Here again, there's a lot of people that we assist in how to build a good contract governance plan. It has to be transparent. You have to be accountable. It needs to be participatory. In other words, when you're sitting down with your outsourced provider or contracted service provider, you need to sit down and really, look at, have we both participated at the right levels? Are we being inclusive in the ways that we're working together? Regular communication. Here again, we call them client communication reviews, and they can be varied. You can have your front line where you probably meet once a week. The next level up, you probably meet once a month, and the next time you meet, it's quarterly. But let me tell you, here again, this is where sometimes I've seen some of these contract governance meetings, if you will, or QBRs, CBRs, whatever you want to refer. I've seen them be very data driven, and here again, not going through, this is what transpired this last, time period, and during that regular time of communication. This is what happened. These were some of the activities that we took, that we performed. This is how many we did, but not just the data. Here again, go into and request, if they're not giving it to you, don't just give me the numbers. Tell me what that means. Tell me how that's going to impact my clients, my customers, the employees that work for the same company as I do. How is that going to improve their productivity? How is it going to make this place safer, cleaner? So don't just give me a bunch of data, and really think about, is there a problem? Early problem detection is extremely important. And I find that in any kind of these relationships, if we really have a partnership, very seldom do you get to the point where it's like, I can't even work with these people anymore. and you're imploding. If you had kept good communications, just like any other relationship, a good marriage, a good partnership, a good friendship, it takes that regular communication and transparency. So I've covered a lot of basic mechanics, but I want to give you just one particular case study, or a couple of, actually two. First one is one of my fellow, he's now going to becoming a consultant, is Peter Stroop. And Peter and I were friends with IFMA, and actually he was on my trip to China when I took some facility managers to China with people to people. And we really got to know each other. And so when it came time for him to need a consultant, he felt very comfortable, but he also wanted me to meet his team and to come on site. And so here again, sometimes working remotely is appropriate, sometimes it's not. But when you're first building that relationship, try and spend as much time as you possibly can together. So I went to Harvard Medical School, and I met with his team, and we had some social time together, we had some professional time together. He created a handbook for me to tell me all about the operation, their facility management operation. It gave me an insight into their roles and responsibilities. It outlined their current contract, and basically they were in a situation where they had an outsourced contract that needed to be, recalibrated, I guess is the right word for it. And in our journey together, once I was on board as their consultant, we discovered that when we went through the contract, we discovered that there were some deficiencies between each party. There were some things that the client wasn't doing or wasn't performing or wasn't delivering, and the outsourced provider had some deficiencies. So, once, I almost felt like an arbitrator or a marriage counselor, if you will, but being able to sit down and look at those details and then to set some realistic parameters for them to truly reach the realistic objectives like I spoke about before. Another example that I can give was when I was at Sprint, and we had two different landscape contracts. And keep in mind, my campus was on 227 acres and had 4.2 million square feet of office and 4.1 of parking structure. So we could easily have two different janitorial contracts. So we built very, very strong SLAs that we wanted met. We had very defined KPIs, but then we also incentivized the organizations because they were graded at different intervals, and if their performance score went below a certain threshold, it allowed us the opportunity to actually take a building from one company and give it to another, and until that company's scores, came back up, but it really created a lot of good competition. They had good incentives to perform at the highest level, but also we were very, very clear with what were the KPIs that we were measuring them on, and we were looking at the agreement through the same lens. So at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions, comments, any other case studies that you feel comfortable in sharing with the group. Please, the microphone is now yours. Josh?
Yes, if you want to actually share like the case studies you mentioned, you just simply by your name, there's a little hand raise column, just click that so I know and I can unmute you and I'll introduce you. Otherwise, you can also just type into the question box if you have a question you want to share that way. We'll give you a moment for that. Okay, looks like something came in. Give me one moment. Wayne does, okay. Wayne, give me just 1 second. Okay, Wayne, you're unmuted. The floor is yours.
Hi, Wayne. Hi, everybody. Hi, Tina. Tina, I have a question, and actually somebody raised this question to me at a recent IFMA meeting about the difference between prescriptive and performance-based contracts. And what they're seeing is that they run into situations where they get into a performance-based contract with a client, but the client treats it as though it's prescriptive. And where they're being nickel and dimed, or they're being micromanaged when it was supposed to be a performance-based contract. And I'm wondering, at what point upstream do we deal with that. And I guess related to that is when we're in these kind of relationships that require a recalibration, I think it's on the vendor side, the associate side, is oftentimes we're afraid to raise a red flag or make a stink because we're afraid we might lose the business, or we just kind of deal with what we have. So is this something that needs to be solved way upstream, and during the RFP process, perhaps, is there a way for a vendor to, kind of deal with that issue before they're in bed with them in a contract, and then it becomes, an unhappy relationship?
Yeah, source of contention. Yeah, I think when I was talking earlier, I talked about a clear definition and line of demarcation for roles and responsibilities. That needs to be really, and at all levels, and that's why it's really good, especially in the final days of the negotiation, literally to have a written kind of guide, if you will. This is what we're responsible for. This is what you're responsible for. This is how it will be conveyed. This is how it will be reported. This is how we will, our line, how we're going to meet, how we're going to communicate, and work through these things. And that needs to be heard at all levels. What I call the first level, second level, and so you've got your kind of, your boots on the ground, the facility manager or a supervisor, and that's the one that they maybe meet with, once a week. And then you've got the, more of a senior level that's still on site, and then you go all the way up to the vice president of corporate real estate, or you go to the COO, depending on the name of, the size of the company. But you said something really interesting, Wayne, when you say sometimes you react with fear. And that's really interesting because I am working with a client right now. And one of the things in a discussion, they said something about when I interviewed some of the clients at different levels, they said our service provider seems hesitant or afraid to tell us what's going on or to communicate when something's wrong, or and basically it's you have to be not afraid to tell the king he has no clothes, right? Because you said it, they're afraid they'll lose the account. But my experience has been, unless you have that transparency that I spoke about and the accountability, you will lose that account. It might just be a slow and painful death. But if you can go right to the point and say, you know what, we're lapping over each other, and it's really causing some frustration. It's really causing, and it's really, it's causing you more work and me, because sometimes we have to go back and redo something. And so if you can just try your best to do that at whatever level it's happening first, but then if that doesn't happen, like I said, go ahead and be bold and go to that next level and just say, this relationship and this partnership is really, really important to us. And we would like to suggest the following changes in the way that this account's being managed. And here's why. And just be bold, because like I said, you can either alienate them, and if they're going to be alienated by that, that's probably not going to be a long-lasting relationship anyway. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Anyone else?
Thank you, Wayne. Just a reminder, anyone, if you have any questions, you can type it into the question box or raise your hand, and I'll be happy to bring you to the floor.
And I went ahead and put my email address up there because, as I said before, your peers and your IFMA fellow IFMA family are usually there. I've never been turned down by one yet when I reached out and needed something. So I am the same, and I would be happy to answer any questions one-on-one for the people that have something they want to ask. Or if you get off the webinar and you say, gosh, I wish I would have asked that, please make note of my email address, and I will be happy to respond to your questions or comments or ideas. I don't have all the answers. I just have some based on my experience of what has worked. If you have some things that you've done and they've helped, and it might be the situation Wayne explained, or you might want to, add something to what I've said, please. I'd love to hear from it. And I know even give you editorial recognition in my presentations.
Excellent. And I think that's a great point, Tina, to lean on that, the IFMA members, and like you mentioned earlier about Engage, that's also a great forum to bring it to a larger audience as well.
It really is.
Questions and issues.
It's one of the coolest things IFMA's done.
Yeah, it's really slick. It works really smooth. Okay, so at this time, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Tina, I want to thank you very, very much for an excellent presentation. And I want to thank everyone for joining us for our webinar, and have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining. Take care.